Hey YouTube, how's it going? This is Viper, and for today's rant, I want to talk about DnD Engine. More so, where they're at, what they could do better, and what the future looks like. Also an opportunity to talk about what I'm working on, but basically, where are we at? If you've never played, well, I'm assuming you clicked on this video because you watch or play or care about Dungeons & Dragons. So, where are we at? Well, there's a couple tools for making a Dungeons & Dragons game, and they're all very similar. They're all either very simple with very limited controls, pretty manageable UI, or they are extremely complex with a shit ton of customization and customizability, but they're all very, I don't know what we'd call the word, janky, a little bit cumbersome. Some things don't work a lot. You gotta turn things off, turn them on, re-click whatever. And so, why is that? You know, because none of these are officially supported. They're really just people who wanted to. They definitely started out as people who wanted to run a D&D campaign, and they didn't. They found the tools available weren't enough, so they made their own. But then, at some point, people made a lot of those, like Roll20 is a good example. And, you know, that's kind of just the go-to. And a lot of the engines were designed to replicate the tabletop. Because D&D started as a tabletop experience. Play on a board with your friends. And you really just have to, in your head, just imagine it all. And that's cool. But with, you know, as technology develops and stuff, there's so much room and potential to make it visually happen as well that I think people haven't taken advantage of. And there are, of course, 3D, like, 3D Dungeons & Dragons-like experiences, but you're telling, those are basically, you're picking your actions in somebody else's story. Sometimes multiplayer, so Baldur's Gate, Divinity, Pathfinder. You know, those are all games where it's somebody else's story. You can slightly affect the story, but ultimately you're on a preset path. There's no room really for like variation. Everything has to be pre-programmed in. And so what I'm wondering is why nobody's ever made basically a tool to create a Dungeons & Dragons-like experience, but their own. So, for instance, in games like that, you need NPCs. NPCs need voices, they need specific responses to certain events. But when you're playing tabletop, the DM chooses the response for everything, right? Or you as the player, or sometimes you'll have a player voice another character. They choose the response for them. Why can't we do that in the game? Why can't we just give people NPCs and then have a DM voice them, or just give them an auto-generated voice, because there's the technology for a synthesized voice now. Why can't we do that? You know, no one's ever done that, so why? And you've seen games that use these auto-generated voices or auto-generated dialogue, and it's actually not bad. I think Horus is a very good example of a game that used auto-generated dialogue, and it still has a charm to it once you get used to it. It still has its own impact. And when you think about what it takes for a DM to make a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, it takes months of work if they want a really good one. They need to plan out all the boards, draw up new sprites for original characters. They need to create variations of the storyline. Where do they think they want their players to go? How are they going to react on certain situations? How can they put their players deliberately in situations that try to get them to do what they want? Shitload of stuff. Maybe the DM wants their own specific set of rules for the world, and they can obviously do that. But again, all the work for that is so mentally demanding, because it all has to be done in the DM's head, or in the player's head. Like, say you want a Sanity Meter, which isn't something that's built into the standard D&D like rule book. You want player sanity, and every move, say they cast, costs some sanity, and at some point they're gonna go insane. So that's just something you need to, like, write down next to you, keep a track of their sanity. Why isn't there a way to just create something like that in the game? And so I went a little off track there, but what I was getting at is these people are basically game developers. They get a tile set, and then they just place the tiles around, and when you're making a game, that's all you're doing. Like, somebody made this rock for them, sure, and some variations of rocks, and then they just decided, let's drag it, put it here. Let's take this pillar, put it here, let's take another pillar, put it over there, rock there, here's our tree, let's throw 5 of them around to create an environment. So what if you took a game like Baldur's Gate, and instead of the developers making a level for the players to play in, what if you just gave easy-to-use tools to the DMs and said, here, make your own level? Because there's this like push, I think, in game dev for user-generated content. We want users to be able to make and distribute and play other people's content because it helps the game stay alive. So TF2 is probably a good example of a game where there's so much user-generated content in that game, to the point where for some people that's all they do when they play the game. When I have thousands of hours in TF2, and a lot of those were spent surfing on surf maps, which are custom-made maps that community members made and enjoyed. So I think what people need to realize, and something I'm actually working on, is if you give the people the tools and you make them coherent enough, easy enough to understand, you'll get people that want to use them to make their own vision. Because, sure, I can come up with a good story, maybe, but what if somebody else wants to tell another story in your world or using your resources? They have to mod it to do that. So, say you had Baldur's Gate, which is extremely, very visually stunning game, and all the tools that you gave to the developers to create this world, you just gave them to players, that they can make their own world. Yeah, making an automatic grid system is very easy. You literally just pick a number and start arbitrarily drawing grids, and then if a slope is too steep, they just can't stand on that part of the grid. And auto-navigation between grids has been done forever. So making AI, if you didn't want to individually, as the game master, move all the players, you could individually move, or you could automatically move them. So say you want a bunch of guards surrounding a door, say this is an entrance and your players are slowly walking up, and you have guards on the other side, you want them to automatically react to the players. You can do that, and I think you could make this really cool mix between real-time role-playing in either third or first person, in like, oh, here's this grand canyon where me and my group are going through, and you're all moving in real time instead of, we're here, now we're teleported here, our tokens are here now, our tokens are here, and you have to mentally envision, my character is this bleeding gladiator who was in a fearsome battle trying to get back to town, when you could just see it. And of course, there's a lot of problems with this, but is that something you think you'd be interested in? If you were a DM, would you be interested in, say, auto-generate me a landscape? And if you've ever seen Minecraft, ever played Minecraft, this ground here, this could very easily be automatically generated. And then you could come in and throw some rocks down, some trees, some foliage, give it a little bit of life. But here's the cool thing. Even if you didn't want to do that as a DM, you could make tools that automatically do this. So you can make basically an AI that randomly draws lines from the sky downwards and says, put a rock here, 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 here. And you might get something that looks cool, and you might get something that doesn't. But that's the great thing about the AI doing it, is if you don't like it, do it again. And then do it again. Versus a player or a human coming in and saying, tree here, this feels a bit empty. Let's get some foliage in here. Right? If you didn't like how it came out, just pick a new seed to generate it and do it again. And I think you could get some really cool looking areas with a mix of both human and player generated environments. And you can, and a lot of games do this already. You might not realize it, but there's a lot of games that do this already for generating terrains, for generating levels. They'll do some automated generation of an area, and then once they see it and go, yeah, this looks pretty good, to start adding some stuff to. Like, if you take out this archway, take out the bridges, take out the rocks, you could envision a Minecraft terrain generating this kind of staggered, peaks in small places terrain. You absolutely could. And so, the tools, the technology is absolutely there. What I'm curious about is why no one's done it yet. Like, I don't feel like this is a novel idea for me. Maybe it's the perceived workload. Like, it sounds like it'd be way too much work to make something like this. But I don't think it really would be, because let's think about what we need in order. So we need a terrain generator that can automatically create AI pathways. That's kind of hard, but not very, very easily doable, I think. There's so much resources online for procedurally generated terrain. Next, we need a terrain editor, which, again, I don't think is that hard, because if you've ever used a game engine, or if you're a developer, you know this. Unity has built-in terrain tools. People have made ones you can buy. Unreal Engine, also the same. Minecraft is basically a terrain editing tool. Space Engineers has runtime procedural terrain generation and editing. And that's all you really need. You need some very rudimentary tools, a flatten, add, be able to draw whatever material you want on the terrain. And that's all you really need. And then the ability to just drag and drop structures wherever you want them. Be able to change where this rock is. And those tools are already built into engines. You just need to expose them to the players or replicate them. And I think replication's really easy when it comes to, like, game development. If there's something that already exists and you say, okay, I want to make that again, I think it's fairly easy to do. There's definitely some skill needed for it, but all in all, I think it's not too hard to do. And then what else do we need? We need characters, so that's another big one. When it comes to tokens, all you really need is one piece of artwork for your token, a splash screen. If you're looking at the screen right now, say that's the cube in the bottom right. Say my character is just this cubicle shape. But now you need to make a 3D model of it. You need to rig it. You need to give it different clothes, different shaders. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And then you need to animate it. Whereas on the tabletop, or these 2D engines, you can just imagine my character swinging his mighty sword. When it comes to a 3D environment, all that mental imagery is removed, and now they literally have to do this big, powerful swing. And if they don't, they need to not only now imagine their character doing a big, powerful swing, they need to turn off the part of their brain that says what they're seeing didn't look like a big, powerful swing. Like, in this game, say, I've got this big ball of energy charging up, I unleash it. Now, what if I told you this was that attack? This little fireball. It doesn't feel like this big, powerful attack that I'm winding up and getting rid of. It's just a little fireball. So, that's the challenge, I guess, is how do you handle animations? And that's definitely a very big one. And that's probably the bottleneck, if I had to go out on a limb and guess what is keeping something like this from being done. It's probably that. It's animations and 3D models. But I think you could overcome a good amount of that with a dedicated team that makes animations, and then make the rigs publicly available so people can make their own animations, and use industry standard practice, like say a Mixamo rig for your humanoid characters, so that you could import animations onto them. So it's not only on you as the developer or pushing it onto your DMs to make animations. They already exist, it's just a matter of them finding them and applying them to the game. So you need to make a game engine where you allow people to import animations to your characters and it just works. That's the hard part, actually. Is because you can do all that stuff in Engine, but can you do that in a deployed game? So basically your game then becomes basically a mimicked Unity or Unreal Engine with less features and a lot of AI or procedurally generated content to give the dungeon masters less work. So character customization is definitely a big thing. That can definitely take a lot of work to make. But I think the main work in that is done by artists. The actual programming of it is readily available to... I've actually created a very rudimentary character customizer where you can change their height, you can change all their facial features, you could change their weight, you could change their musculature, if they're very muscular or not. The real hard part there is making armors that look cool, and then bending those armors to fit the changes. But it's all doable. It just takes a bit of work. I guess that's where I'm at with this whole like rant is, this stuff's all doable. Why has no one done it? It just takes some work. So, I guess it's time for me to promote, I guess, like a little project I'm working on. And that project is pretty much just this. I want to make a DnD engine that's 3D, that people can roleplay in, that gives them all of these tools, make it freely accessible, and what you'll pay for, if you want to pay for it, is alternative building sets. So the idea here is basically give people, here are some dungeon elements, some statues, some a wall texture you can use, some sort of imagery. Here's the ground, here's like a ground texture 1, here's a secondary ground texture, and basically go wild DM. I've already made procedurally generated terrain with different seeds, and so what you'll then pay for, you make it a premium service, so people can use that for free, and users can make their own and share it with other people if they want. But if they want to pay for certain things that you as the developer supply to them, then they can do that as well. So say you want to provide them with music. Music's another big one, where I see people playing Dungeons & Dragons on these tabletop simulators, essentially, and they need to play YouTube. They need to alt-tab, or they have a Discord bot playing music for them. Why? Why not just build that into the engine? You can give people a select list of, here's your battle music, here's your wandering music, here's your mystical, airy... And there's a lot of freely accessible music that's available for that already. And then you can have composers that you pay to make it, and then you can allow users to buy certain music for certain situations. Allow them to preview it, and then if they want a really epic symphony for their final boss, they can pay for that through microtransactions. And I mean, make it like cheap and accessible. Like, I need some boss music a boss theme. $4, $5. I think that's pretty reasonable, considering some of these games get away with a skin that in a first-person game you barely even see. You see the arms of for $15, $20. I think $5 is reasonable. You want a dungeon pack of resources, one that gives you a preset, so you as the developer can make a preset dungeon layout, and then you can also give them the pieces so they can make their own dungeon. I think $15, maybe $10 is pretty reasonable for that. And I, as somebody who would want to make a D&D campaign, that sounds completely reasonable to me, to pay that amount if I want customization. So that's really where this boils down, is you've got a tool that on its own gives people a way to play Dungeons & Dragons and give them the option to either have as much or as little control as they want from their DM. You could even probably play without a DM if you wanted to in this system I've thought up. So the DM is designing the world, designing the encounters, but you can very easily just put that all to an AI. It wouldn't be the most amazing experience, for sure. It wouldn't even compare to a good DM. But it would give people who've never played Dungeons & Dragons, who maybe don't have people that are experienced DMs, it gives them this gateway from no experience to, and no control, to as much control as they want. So say you're playing right now, say this was an auto-generated world, and you're like, I want a really big bridge to go across here. Somebody could say, okay, let's look at the DM controls. Oh, they have this, they have these, like, rock pieces. I can now create a bridge between this and this. Just stack a bunch of rocks across. And so it sort of becomes half an auto-generated world, half their world, and then they could take over it as much as they want with the terrain controls. They could make a giant hole in the ground, and this is where an asteroid fell, and it's a very holy site. Add some, add some occultist imagery in there. And boom. The real challenges become... the system needs to be able to allow people to drag and drop their own music in if they want to. They need to be able to drag and drop their own 3D models if they want to. And they need to be able to drag and drop their own 3D assets if they want to. This allows users to make their own content, and it allows you, as the developer, to make and then sell your own content to them if they don't have resources, if they don't want to make their own, or they can't find their own online. So for instance, there's a lot of really freely accessible, very good resources out there that people can use for game development, but you can also use them for Dungeons & Dragons. Like, so take, what's it called? VR chat, as an example. Look up a video of VR chat. You've got a fully rigged Family Guy characters, you've got anime characters from literally every anime that people just make because they want to. And so I think if you give people the tools to make this, they will. They'll absolutely make their own content for it, and all you need to do to, as a developer, to keep supporting it is just make stuff alongside your community that people can pay for. You could even have You could even reward people for making their stuff public. So say you make an original character, like this is my knight, his name is Sir Davenport, and he looks really cool. He's got a cool armor set. If you want other people to be able to use it, give them the ability to list that, allow people to buy it, and then give them some percentage of that. So it's like paid mods for Skyrim, but it's all at your discretion as the DM. Like, do I want this? You could have a pretty good marketplace going where some people might even just like make their, you know, side hobby, side hustle is making characters. Some people already do that for VR chat, but making it for D&D, making D&D characters. And so if you're not a particularly creative individual and you just want to look at a store and pick out a character instead of designing your own character, you can absolutely do that, and there's absolutely no shame in it, and you'll have this user-generated list of characters to scan from, developer assets that are just built into the game. You have to give them a base set of tools. That's very critical. You need to give them a base set of character customization, but then there's also these custom armor sets that people made. There's these custom there's a snake character that this group of people made. You can buy a four-legged character set with animations and everything if you want to play like an animal character. You know, the sky's the limit, really, and it's really just about creating this base core set for enough people to start liking it to the point where they generate their own content for it, and then it's this self-sustaining cycle, really, where you give people the tools and you just let them loose on it, and they can support you by donating, by buying cool music, cool skins for their characters, which people already do, but they can use it in a role-playing scenario instead of just like in a shooting game. So what do you think? Why hasn't this been done? Would you be interested in something like this if I were to keep working on it? Do you think there's potential? Do you think this is like years of work? Do you think you would hop on something like this maybe early in development, so it's got the basic terrain generation, it's got the basic character customization, it's got the basic animation sets, day-night cycle, some weather effects, those are very easy, good lighting, and boom, you're off to the races with a good role-play environment for people to create their own stories, rather than me as a developer say, well, that's cool, but I'm gonna go Baldur's Gate 3, make my own story, and they get to play it. They can make their own builds, their own character, but they're playing my story. Where instead, you give this to people and say, feel free to make your own story, and try to fill in the gaps for people that don't have a large group to play with. They can still play this and make their own story, or have a generated story for them. Of course, do a hand-coded base story to give to people. But then for other people saying, you don't have to use that, make your own, go wild. If you want to make a world where everything is a bunch of floating rocks, you can do that. You can absolutely do that. And you build in the built-in physics and pathfinding, and then you can give them solutions for getting across those things. Like, literally, all the tools we as developers use to just drag and drop buildings into places, to enable, disable things, to pause the universe, you can just give those to DMs and let them go crazy. Like, imagine, I don't know if this will come up. Where's my tab here? Imagine, well, this, yeah, okay, so imagine this, Baldur's Gate 3.
You can use against enemies.
Just imagine all like being able to create this environment as you would as a developer, and then just giving that to players. Like, if you're looking at this and like, man, I wish there was like an archway here. What if we just got rid of this and made it a giant, like sunken pit in the ground? All you as the developer really need to do is just give them materials so they can draw it out how they want to. And as the game gets more complex, you'll need more complex solutions to allow people to customize more. But I think there's real potential in this, and I think just the getting the base in there would be enough to allow people to create a good role play scenario. Yeah, so tell me what you think. What are some things, some potential hazards you think I haven't voiced? And would you be interested? If you're an artist, if you'd like to work with me on this, please feel free to reach out and let me know what you think. As always, I'm Viper. Thank you for listening to my rant for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Take it easy.